And I just think as educators, we want to make sure we're prepared for those days to the best of our ability. Alexander Graham Bell said, "By failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail." Gathering items for various learning activities will take time and effort, but it's worth it.
Welcome to the BJU Press Teacher Edition podcast, where Christian educators are encouraged and inspired as we bring you interviews, practical ideas, strategies, and answer your questions about teaching in today's culture. And here's your host, Jenny Copeland.
Welcome to today's episode of the Teacher Edition podcast. We are so glad you've joined us, and I'm confident you're going to be glad you did as well. As we get started, let me again remind you to take a minute and subscribe to the podcast. You don't want to miss one single episode with our fantastic guests. I also want to encourage you to leave us a review. That really does help others find this show as well. And don't forget to follow us on social media. We are Teacher Edition Podcast on Facebook. Oh, and by the way, we are Teacher Edition Podcast on YouTube now as well, so you can jump on over and catch the video of this interview. And you can find us on Instagram and TikTok at Teacher Edition Pod. That's Teacher Edition Pod. And lastly, we're looking for your questions still, so I want to invite you to go to our website, teachereditionpodcast.com. There you can subscribe to our emails and read more about this podcast. You can also submit your questions. These are the questions that we share at the end of the episode, so you're going to want to check that out. It's a simple click of a button, and you can record your question. So I am so excited to have Julie Madsen with us today. Julie is one of the national consultants here at BJU Press. She has a doctorate in education from St. Louis University, and she's been a teacher, early childhood director, and a principal for 13 years in Christian schools. She enjoys coaching others and working with students of all ages. But today, I want to tap into her experience with the little people. Julie, welcome to the show. Are you up for talking little learners today?
Absolutely. Thank you, Jenny, for having me. If I may, I'd love to give a shout out to all the early childhood educators out there. Thank you for all that you do for our littlest learners.
Absolutely. I echo that as well. So I will say, going right along with that, I have respect for educators on all levels. Each level deals with anomalies that are specific to that grade and that subject. Some have super challenging content. Others have simple content, but they're trying to communicate it to students with literally zero hooks to hang that knowledge on. Others have potty training adventures, while others are navigating attitudes and hormones. There are challenges on all sides. So that being said, I'm always amazed, though, to watch a preschool teacher. Well, specifically the ones who are masters in their area. That is one that's a well-oiled machine. I never cease to be amazed how the room never stops. It can't stop. There's always some instruction, some song, activity, something going on. There's never a wait right there while I go out and talk to such and such parent. Nope. That show has to run seamlessly, nonstop, and with an unending string of intentional comments, directions, songs, and so on. It's an art. Julie, I want to talk about managing classrooms of little learners today. Every year brings a new crop of students, changes in culture, society, even changes in our Christian school families. But I'm pretty confident there are some constants that are, I guess you could say, those heavy hitters when it comes to effectively and efficiently managing a classroom of little people. So Julie, let's start with some basics. What are your thoughts on how early childhood educators, I guess you could say, shape their classrooms?
Right. I want to start with, too, is just how important those first 5 years of life are. It's extremely critical. Development is happening. Students are making over 1 million new connections those first 5 years of life. 90% of their brain development occurs during those first 5 years of life. And every sight, smell, sound, sensation makes a huge impact on their development. The 5 senses help students to experience the world through their senses. All these experiences help students to interact with one another and see how things work together. I feel like this podcast is perfect. It's summertime, getting ready for our new school year. I feel like the Bible is an excellent example of how crucial the beginning provides context and purpose. The book of Genesis signifies the origins of the Bible. His word teaches us about God, the universe, and even about ourselves. I'd like to identify myself as an expert in kindergarten, Jenny, and it's not because I am certified in kindergarten. I'm actually certified birth through 12th grade, but I didn't pass kindergarten the first time. I had to repeat it. So I have to wonder, had I not been in a preschool or pre-K program prior, would that have not helped me be successful in kindergarten? So we're going to talk about the 3 Ps of shaping up your classroom with little learners. And so we're going to start with be prepared. Preparation is a key component to an early childhood teacher. You know what happens when you're not ready for the day. Jenny, I don't know about our speakers, but there were definitely days as a mom, I was trying to get my kids in the car. I have a story of I get my kids in the car. I realize my son does not have his shoes on his feet, and we are on our way to school. I'm like, that's okay. I'll go by Target. It's a little too early, so they're not open yet. So we go to school. He just doesn't have shoes. And Jenny, my day just continued like that. I had a sweet little girl that was crying, a parent that wanted to talk to me. And I just think as educators, we want to make sure we're prepared for those days to the best of our ability. Alexander Graham Bell said, by failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail. Gathering items for various learning activities will take time and effort, but it's worth it. So I encourage teachers to gather their materials the night before and be strategic in how you set up and arrange your classroom so that students can move around. So we talked about being prepared, and next is being persistent. We need to be persistent when handling classroom situations. The word persistent means continuing firmly in a course of action in spite of difficulty, opposition. Difficulties will occur in your classroom due to time constraints, special needs of our students. Keep on keeping on is a great slogan for a preschool teacher. Do not give up and do not give in. Even if you're tired, stick to your classroom management plan. Consistency helps provide little learners with comfort, and security can help develop important skills. And the last piece, we talked about being prepared, being persistent, is be positive. Negativity is contagious. Children sense our negativity, and they'll also become negative. We must be positive about our own abilities as a teacher and about the abilities of each one of our students. We are their cheerleaders, and we want them to succeed. So I hope they find these 3 Ps, prepared, persistent, and positive, helpful in shaping up your classroom for your new school year.
That is such a good start. So be prepared, be persistent, and be positive. That's pretty easy to remember. Okay, let's talk space, because there is just something magical about walking into a preschool classroom and seeing so many colorful things, decorations, centers, play areas, and such. And then there are other rooms that are a little tight, a bit more maybe aged up. Talk to us about the role of space. Do you feel that space could be an issue for an early childhood teacher?
I do. I feel like space is very important, and I think we are given what God gives us, and having to, depending on where we're located, whatever space we have, and using it to the best of our ability. In the end, you want your learning activities to take place in space that is both ideal for behavior and active engagement or movement. Not only may your floor plan affect your method of instruction, but it can also aid in behavior management and in discipline. Make sure the classroom that you have flows well. Consider how much room those tiny bodies need for transitions. So here's a couple questions I would use to determine which regions of your classroom would be necessary. First, where will your students line up? So you want to decide where are they going to line up? Is there enough space? If there's not enough space, that's where you're going to see the pushing, the shoving, and of course, all that comes with emotion. So you want to make sure that you have the appropriate space for your students to line up. Also, you want to consider, is your program play-based, or will they be collaborating in small groups? Because you want to make sure if you are doing collaboration that you have a space for that in your room. Is there space for where your cubby area is? Is it for their backpacks and their jackets and whatever other materials they would need? And then another question would be, can they queue up for hand washing before snacks so not to bother other kids in a nearby station or a reading nook? So you just have to be very mindful of where you're placing certain centers around your room. You want to set aside spaces for eating, stations or centers, playing, quiet time, and add in other regions of the classroom. You enable the kids to modify their behavior and expectations based on the purpose of each area by breaking up these activities into distinctive classroom sections. Also, here are a few more tips. Giving your students the freedom to store their materials and manipulatives and equipment also instills a sense of responsibility. Here are a few tips on how to help organize your classroom supplies, because we want our students to be able, if we want them to be able to hang up their own jacket and grab their own box. So here are some more ways to organize. Use clear bins or storage containers so that your students can see what are inside your bins. If you're like me, I loved colored bins. So what I had to do as a teacher is I had to print labels, and I would put the words like block on there, and there would be blocks in my colored tub, and then I would have pictures of the block so that if the kids couldn't read, they could see the picture. You also want to organize supplies or materials on a low shelf if you want your students to be able to access them. So you don't want the kids having to pull it over their head, dropping it on the floor. You just want to make sure that the students are able to reach it.
That is so good. I love that you pointed out so much about space comes back to behavior and movement. And I think so often as teachers, we unknowingly, or, we definitely don't want to, but we cause an issue. We crowd them, or we force the line to kind of go right through an area where a group of students is trying to work. And then, like you said, emotions do tend to kind of come up there. Small changes can make a big impact. I'm not one of those people who can walk in a room and say, hey, if we move one thing, I think this will make it much better. But I have friends who can, and I would tend to tap into them and say, look at my room. What's one thing I could change, or two things? And it's amazing how a small thing can make such a big difference. So I love those things that you pointed out, how behavior and movement really are impacted by our space. So talking about space, let's keep going from there. Much of that space is taken up by centers. So I think for those who don't spend a lot of time in these young classrooms, it could easily just look like multiple play areas all around the room. But in fact, they're play areas, the lifeline is the intentionality of those centers and the play that's happening at them. So Julie, talk with us about some factors that teachers should consider when they are creating their classroom centers in that space.
Absolutely. And when you're creating your centers, you want to be mindful of what furniture you're using. Where would you like your tables and shelving? How about drawers or tubs that need to be pulled out? You want to make sure that they have appropriate space and students can reach those tubs. So the first factor you want to consider is the noise factor. How loud is that area or that center? It will be loud whether it's a music center, drama center, or block center. What about spaces that promote quiet and tranquility, like a quiet area or a listening area or a library? Those peaceful and lively places certainly shouldn't be next to each other. So we talked about the noise factor. Next is popularity factor. So which section or portion of the room will probably be the busiest? As a teacher, mine were the drama center, the arts center, and the block center. So I made sure if I had the space, I made those centers a little bit bigger because I knew it took some movement and for them to get around. Next is the supervision factor. Are all centers visible to you? Is it possible to watch kids playing in each of the centers if you're sitting, meeting with a group, or if you're walking around as a teacher? Or is something missing? You want to be able to see everything for reasons of safety and supervision. Never have your back to the kiddos. I'll have to admit, Jenny, my first year as a kindergarten teacher, I bought this beautiful tent and I was so excited. I want you to know that tent lasted a week. Students had taken markers into the tent, and I promise you that I was bummed, but I realized I couldn't see what they were doing in the tent. And so I had to learn a hard way. So you just want to sometimes there are really fun things to have in classrooms, but you just want to make sure that you can see what's going on at all times.
Oh yeah, that's so true. And kids love forts or tents or things like that. That's right up their alley. And we tend to build these amazing little places they can read and stuff like that, and then we can't see what they're doing. And especially in this day and age, beyond just like you said, marker art and fun things that they can do. Other areas we want to make sure that we protect ourselves and them and be able to see all that. So I'm so glad you mentioned that. So at the start of the episode, I talked about the nonstop interaction all morning long. The instruction time, sure, those are more delineated. But the transitions of, those are the times when we see classes just disintegrate. There aren't too many little learners who will just patiently sit on their mat and wait or calmly take their place in line or follow the child in front of them into the restroom, no problem. Transitions can be tragic or seamless, but that takes work. So Julie, why do you feel that little learners struggle with this? Why do they need help with transitions? What do you think?
Absolutely. For little learners, switching from one activity to another can be challenging. Students may transition from one activity to the next more easily and without stress with enjoyable classroom transition activities. Using reliable cues like a sound or a sign to alert your preschoolers when it's almost time to finish their current task and move to the next will help them transition more easily. Here at BJU Press, we say the teacher is the key. You create a schedule, but depending on your students' needs, it may need to change, and you can still keep your routine with your transition. So here are some transition ideas. You can use songs. So you can use songs for hand washing. You can use songs for cleaning up. Lots of different songs that you can incorporate in class. When you are ready to move to a special or go out to recess, you could have students walk quietly like a mouse down the hall so you can get them excited about these transitions with fun ideas. Maybe if you want to get them ready to line up, sometimes as teachers, we have them all line up at one time, but you can be creative in the way you do that as well. Maybe you have them line up by the birth of the month that they were born in, maybe by their hair color, maybe by colors that they are wearing, maybe if they lost any teeth, they get to line up first. So just being creative in the way you distract them. If there's emotions there about knowing that they have to stop what they're doing, you can distract them. Another thing I did as a pre-K teacher was I would have index cards with the students' names on them. And so I could show them and see if the students could identify their name. And that was another fun way to have them line up. You always have your students that do really well and they come in knowing their name. So I would try to spell their name and really they're just listening for the first 2 or 3 letters. So that, again, just another fun way to get them ready for transition. Timers are also another great resource. I'm not big into technology for early childhood. I think songs that are learning are a lot of fun, but there are great timers like a volcano, a 2-minute volcano, and it shows a lava going up and then it explodes and they know that it's time to go on to the next thing. When using transitions, you want to make sure that you have a balance, especially with little learners. You don't want to have all these different transitions that they're using. You want to make sure that you kind of have a routine with your transitions and kids don't get confused by those. Visuals are also another great resource as you're teaching your students, transition songs, things like that. And then you also want to be consistent with your transitions. So I hope these are helpful tools in creating transitions to help your students and ultimately help with classroom management. I thought of a couple more factors too that I should have included when we talked about factors to consider when creating classroom centers. One is a boundary factor, so helping students learn their boundaries. We, at the school that I was at, we could use blue painter's tape. That was what we were okay to use on carpet or floor, anything like that. And so sometimes you can even give students like blue tape on their right and on their left that teach them to stay in their area. When you're little, you just want to be close to everybody, but not every student is like that. Also, if they're sitting in a chair, they like to move around a lot, and you can use that blue tape. So you're really teaching them boundary factors. Or even if they're in their stations, that this is where you stay, and when the timer goes off, then you can rotate to your new station. So just teaching them, just like you said at the very beginning, Jenny, early childhood teachers are teaching kids so many things. And then also proximity factor. So do centers require close proximity in order to receive supervision or questions? Mine was, I had a sensory bend, and please know they are so fun, but that is definitely one thing you want to stay by because a lot of the time it has rice or beans or things that can fit in your ear or your nose or make teaching super exciting. I know. So you just want to make sure, for me as a teacher, I had to make sure that I was by those areas. Another way to consider proximity factor is getting the supplies that preschoolers need and that they can grab those materials that they need. Also helping them clean up and be able to clean up in their area. And then the bonus is it gives you less work later if the students learn to clean up.
Yeah, back to the beans and rice discussion.
Yes. So thank you for letting me share those 2 more factors that I had.
No, those are excellent. That's great. So helpful, so practical. And I love what you mentioned about the transitions. That's excellent. And having a plan. And even some new teachers I've seen just carrying cards with them, just a reminder of what to do if I need to quick pull them back in. I remember I had a teacher once that I worked with, and I'd hear her going down the hall, and if things would start to get a little unnerved, she'd just start singing. And I remember sometimes just looking at her, that one hasn't been written yet. She just knew she had to do something to get them all pulled back in. And if they heard her singing, there was just something magical about that. So she'd just sing about everything, the lights and the walls and the carpet. And it was just, maybe not on the card, but hey, it worked. And she had a plan for what she was doing. And I've seen so many of those teachers that are just amazing because they have a plan. And I love the different, very practical ideas you gave. Those are great. So let's wrap up talking about routines. Again, for some, it may seem like the early childhood classroom is just babysitting or corralling play. But in fact, an intentional teacher is just going to be really wise and intentional in using every minute. And a significant part of that is routine, not just for the schedule per se, but the predictability and those procedures that the students get used to. So Julie, as we wrap up, talk with us about how classroom routines can be really helpful for teachers, but also for the students.
Sure. And I like to start with, as adults, we like our routines. I don't know about you, Jenny, but I have my routine in the morning. I have my breakfast. I brush my teeth. And so, like you said, it's just as important for students to have a routine too. Creating a schedule for yourself is as crucial as building one for your students. Throughout the day, routines play a crucial role in controlling children's behavior and expectations. Start your students on a routine from the very beginning. Use verbal cues and visual signals to help guide them throughout the day in the classroom. Circle time in the morning, quiet time after lunch, rest time, clean up at the end of the day are all possible parts of a teacher's routine. Through research, these are the 5 reasons I find why routines matter to little learners. So our first one is establishing routines help students feel comfortable and secure. Students have big feelings, and we need to be able to let them rely on us to be safe. I know as a teacher, my first 2 weeks were just kind of teaching my classroom rules and also just talking about our big feelings that we have, all the different emotions that we can have and what to do when we have those emotions. So again, number 1 was we help students feel comfortable and secure. Number 2, routines lessen power disputes. Routines help give students confidence and also a sense of control when they are given routines to reduce power struggles. 3, routines empower autonomy to become more independent. Like we talked about earlier, taking off your jacket, tying your shoe, hand washing, hanging up backpack. If students know expectations, they are able to empower themselves. My 4th one is routines develop self-care skills. This helps students know when they need to relax or to recharge. So if a student is feeling overwhelmed, they can take a moment to themselves. They know what's coming. Number 5, routines support healthy cognitive, social, and emotional growth. Routines offer the chance to build self-confidence, curiosity, social skills, self-control, communication skills, and more. With routines, little learners will stay safe, and your classroom will remain organized with effective classroom management. Create an enjoyable and productive learning environment for your students by implementing these useful classroom management techniques.
Julie, these have been great, so practical, great reminders. While likely most listeners who work with younger students could probably identify these vital classroom elements, sometimes the best thing, though, that we need is just to go back to the basics and just kind of regroup. And this has been so helpful, Julie. I appreciate you taking time and just kind of taking us back to the beginning, remind us of some of these super important elements and giving us some really practical ideas. So thank you for taking time to share with us today.
Thank you, Jenny, for having me.
And to all those of you who are listening and watching, thank you for joining us today. I hope you were challenged and encouraged as I was. Remember to go to teachereditionpodcast.com to submit questions for upcoming episodes. Of course, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on social media. Now, it's time to get back to your day, but it's not just any day, because every day in a classroom is your day to impact and inspire through God's power and through His grace working in you. Now go do what God has called you to do.